In 1902, a 14-year-old boy arrived by boat in Key West, Florida, on his way to Tampa to join his brothers and sisters who had emigrated there 2 years before. His name was Arturo Fuente. Young Arturo had come from Cuba with nothing in his pockets, but in his heart he had a dream. He could have no idea what lay ahead of him. When Arturo Fuente arrived in Tampa, he settled in the unique and lively community known as Ybor City. Ybor City, founded by a Spanish businessman named Vicente Martinez Ybor, was created in 1885 to support the growing cigar industry in Tampa. Ybor City quickly became a true melting pot, populated by industrious immigrants determined to make a better life for themselves and their families. It was here in this community, full of hope and energy, that Arturo Fuente's own dream of starting a cigar business began to take shape. And sure enough, at age 24, he started a small cigar factory. A. Fuente and Company was established in 1912 to make all Cuban handmade cigars. Within 10 years, Arturo Fuente built his company into a business with 500 employees. The dream of a young Cuban immigrant had become a reality. But then, in 1924, while he was in Cuba buying tobacco, tragedy struck. Arturo Fuente's factory burned to the ground. He lost everything. It seemed as if Arturo Fuente's dream of building a family cigar business had ended. It would be more than 20 years before the seeds of that dream would take root again. Meanwhile, the Fuente family was growing. Arturo and his wife Cristina had one son, Arturo Jr. Then, in 1935, they welcomed their second son. They named him Carlos. Little did they know that their son Carlos would one day take his father's dream to unimaginable heights. In 1946, 22 years after the fire that destroyed his first factory, Arturo Fuente, at age 58, tried to build his dream again. He started the Arturo Fuente Cigar Factory. This time, he opened it in the back of his house. The home factory was a beehive of activity. From 6 in the morning to midnight, friends and employees populated the house, rolling cigars from tobacco brought in from Cuba. Arturo Fuente was a modest man, and he ran his business in a modest way. He sold his handmade cigars only in the Tampa area, and he sold every box on a cash-only basis. If someone wanted a box of cigars, they came to the house at any hour of the day or night and paid for it. During his teenage years, Carlos Fuente was like any other kid, except for one thing.
My brother and I, we used to come from school, so the first thing that we were taught when we came from school, the first thing we had to do is make cigars. We had to make 50 cigars each, and then we can go out and do the homework, or go out and play whatever we wanted. So it wasn't easy, it was pretty tough, but I used to enjoy it because I liked the business. My brother didn't enjoy it too much, so my brother used to tell me, let's work together so we can make it faster. So we were always arguing back and forth because I didn't want to make it faster, he wanted to make it faster.
In 1953, at age 18, Carlos Fuente married his childhood sweetheart, Ana Lopez, and started his own family. His father's cigar business was generating just enough income to take care of his wife and himself. Carlos Fuente had his own family to support now, so for most of the 1950s, he had to find other work.
When I started with my wife, because we were teenagers when we started going together, then my father-in-law, in those days, bakers were like being doctors, and all the family of my wife's side were all bakers. So when he couldn't get rid of me, because he tried to get rid of me, but he saw that that I was really interested, and he couldn't get rid of me, so he decided that I better learn a trade. So he got me a job in a bakery.
Little did anyone know, but this young man who was struggling to support his family by making bread and pastries would soon change the cigar world forever. In 1954, Carlos Fuente's wife gave him a son. They named him Carlos Fuente Jr. Like his grandfather and his father before him, little Carlito would have tobacco in his blood. It was 1956. Arturo Fuente, at 68 years of age, asked his son Carlos if he wanted to take over the cigar business.
My father then, he was 65 years old. He decided that my brother had no interest in the factory. I'll put the factory in your name. So I told him, well, if you do that, I would take it only under one condition. I would take the factory, but we have to do it legally. I bought it from my brother for $1.
So at age 21, Carlos Fuente quit his job as a baker and went to work in the family business. 44 years after Arturo Fuente first started the business in Tampa, his son Carlos was about to carry on the family tradition. He could have no idea what trials and tribulations lay ahead of him. Carlos Fuente wanted to put his own ideas into practice. His father had always run the business on a cash basis and limited sales to the Tampa area. So Carlos introduced the notion of selling cigars based on credit so he could establish ongoing accounts. Then he set about expanding the market for the Fuente brand outside the Tampa area.
So we got to sell credit. I'll go to Miami. So I started traveling, which without no sales experience really. I started going out and I went to Miami and I opened a distributor there. And that's the way we started growing.
It all worked, and the Arturo Fuente Cigar Company began to grow. But then came the Cuban Revolution in 1959. At first, no one was sure what the implications would be for the American cigar companies who used Cuban tobacco in their blends, and for a few years the tobacco kept coming. Then in 1962, Carlos Fuente was visiting family in Cuba when it became clear to him that the United States was about to place a complete trade embargo on the Caribbean island. So without telling his father, he bought all the Cuban tobacco he could.
So sure enough, I bought the tobacco, then we got it. So naturally we had Cuban tobacco for 3 years. So then I was offered all kinds of money. I remember I paid for those bales at that time $250 a bale. And then we were offered $1,250, $1,500 a bale. And I used to tell my father, Dad, sell the tobacco, sell the tobacco. He said, shut up, you won't dare sell it. So that helped us to stay and maintain the same cigars for another 3 years.
When the Cuban tobacco supply ran out, Carlos and Arturo Fuente experimented with blends of tobacco from other countries until they finally found a blend that met with their satisfaction. The blend was called Flor de Orlando, and even though there wasn't a shred of Cuban tobacco in it, it was a success, and the company continued to grow. But soon the factory was outgrowing its small space in the Fuente home.
We got to a point that we grew our present place, and then I started taking part of my mother's house. I took one of her living room, I took the bedroom, I kept on taking more and more for the house. I remember we had to move all the furniture. I had to move all the furniture out to the street, middle of the street, to do the tobacco blending, the short filler blending. We used to blend all the tobacco, put them all in boxes, then clean everything up, and then put all the furniture back. It was a job.
So Carlos Fuente started looking for a new home for the company. He soon found it, a 2-story building in Tampa. It was the perfect spot. With the new factory and his determination to grow, Carlos Fuente virtually worked around the clock.
I used to do everything myself. I had to case tobacco, I had to run the place, I had to do everything. I'd do all my bookkeeping, I was doing everything myself because I couldn't afford to pay more people. So one day my wife shows up with my son Carlos in one hand and a bag in the other hand. You don't come home, I'm coming here to live with you.
In 1963, Arturo Fuente retired at the age of 75. Even so, he never left his dream behind. He came to the factory every day to visit and advise his son. The 1970s were a difficult time in the Tampa cigar business. Inflation was rampant. Interest rates were approaching 20%, costs were rising, and business was falling off. To make matters worse, experienced rollers were dying off, and there were few young people willing to take their place. And then, on February 11, 1973, an era ended when Arturo Fuente, the patriarch of the Fuente family, died at the age of 85. As the new patriarch of the Fuente family, Carlos knew that he had some big decisions to make.
It was a time that my grandfather passed on, and my father had to grab the reins and pull the family together. was a time that we had to struggle as a family and overcome the Cuban embargo. And it came to the point that I remember my father and I speaking that we needed to go somewhere else. We had to search somewhere else where we could make handmade cigars.
Over the next few years, Carlos Fuente manufactured cigars in Puerto Rico and then in Mexico. But ultimately, he decided the quality wasn't up to his standards. He even tried to open a factory in the Dominican Republic, but there was too much bureaucracy and a mountain of red tape. Then in 1974, a family friend suggested Carlos try Nicaragua. The Nicaraguan cigars were excellent, and the Fuente brand began to grow again. But then the dream turned into a nightmare. It was early 1978. Political turmoil was building in Nicaragua. Sandinista guerrillas were months away from seizing the national palace in the capital city of Managua. Nicaragua was in a state of social and political upheaval. Carlos Fuente was there as the situation grew more and more dangerous.
It was a total mess. I told myself, what the hell I'm doing here? I went to the front desk to fix my bill, I'm leaving. I went to my room, I got my clothes, threw them in the bag, I rented a car and left. I don't know where I was going. I didn't have no tickets. I went over there and said, I want to buy a ticket to Miami. It's no, everything is booked. We don't know what time it's going to leave. Anyway, make a long story short, well, I had to give some money. I got on the plane. I came home. And the next day at midnight, they called me. Everything is lost. We got burned out. Everything is lost. I never went back.
It was 1978, and Carlos Fuente found himself with no factory and few cigars to sell. He quickly recovered by partnering with a tobacco grower to make cigars in Honduras. But within the year, another tragedy struck.
And I remember one day we got a call. It wasn't about a revolution this time. Accidental fire, the factory's burned down. Our hopes are gone. It's gone, second time. Where are you going to go? Central America's in the middle of a revolution. You got the Sandinistas, you got the Contra Sandinistas, the world's falling apart. Where the hell are you going to go? We're going to go back to the United States, where there's 20-something% interest? Where are you going to go?
Carlos Sr. and his son Carlito decided to give it one last try, this time in the Dominican Republic. Moving the entire operation from Tampa to the Dominican Republic meant leaving everything behind and starting all over again. And to make matters worse, money was very scarce.
I went to see my wife. I told my wife, look, we're going to move to Dominican. So she told me, but we're going to leave everything we got. I had just built a new home, which was paid for. We were living there 10 years. And I told her, we're going to go, and it'll be a short time. It'll be maybe 3 or 4 years until I get the factory going, then we'll come back home. So I told her, I'll go ahead first, and I'll start, and then you come with my younger son.
We didn't want to leave our home. That was our home. We didn't want to leave. I didn't want to leave. I never imagined in my life that I would ever live outside of Tampa. That's my home. That's my grandfather's home. That was my father's home. Never imagined it.
The decision to move was made. But to finance it, Carlos Fuente had to cash in his retirement plan and mortgage his house. He didn't know for sure it would even work. But that didn't stop him. On January 1980, he arrived in the Dominican Republic.
And first I lived in a hotel. Then I couldn't afford the hotel anymore, so I moved to a boarding house.
And I remember he used to call me up every day. He says, look, there's a building that's very small, but it's too big for us. And they're making clothing there, but they're having financial problems. And he used to call me up, he says, you know, if I can make this deal and everything, I'll make it work. I don't know how the hell I'm going to pay for it, but if I can make this deal, maybe we can make it work. And, you know, but going back, my father asked me, what do you have? I said, Dad, I got $3,000, $4,000, $5,000. It's enough. You want to come in? We'll go partners.
It took 8 months of government red tape, but on September 4th, 1980, the first Dominican Arturo Fuente cigar factory opened in the city of Santiago.
All of a sudden, the old Fuente tradition transformed into another Fuente tradition. Our life started to change. We're here. We're hungry. We have lost everything. As father and son, we have walked together, We have fallen together. We have skinned our knees together. Nicaragua, Honduras, Tampa, Ybor City, but now this is survival. We're hungry.
Over the decade of the 80s, the business grew, and the Fuente brand quickly became one of the best known in the world. Meanwhile, Carlito was learning more and more about tobacco growing and blending. He was beginning to get some big ideas of his own. Then one fateful day in 1988, a visitor to the factory said something to Carlito that shook him to the very core of his being.
And I had a group of visitors visiting us, and one gentleman, a very well-known tobacconist, known worldwide, from Paris, France. After visiting our factories, says, "My God, Carlito," says, "the quality controls, the passion, the love that you see among the cigar makers." He says, "It's unique. I have not witnessed this anywhere in the world." He said, "But you're never going to be great. You're never going to be the best, because you don't produce a cigar. You assemble a cigar."
The next year, in 1989, Carlito convinced his father to let him try to do what no one had been able to do before: grow wrapper tobacco in the Dominican Republic.
And when I heard they said that you cannot grow wrappers, I asked myself, why not? Why not? I said, this is it. Why not? You know what they told me? They told me you can't grow great wrappers in the Dominican Republic. You have to grow great wrappers in Cuba, because the soils are blessed in Cuba. Soils are blessed. Soil doesn't grow great tobacco alone. It's human beings that grow great tobacco.
Carlito's dream was to make something different, something never before available. An all-Dominican cigar of extraordinary quality. But could he do it? In the beginning, Carlito jokingly called the undertaking Project X from Planet 9. The end result turned out to be anything but a joke. The first wrapper tobacco was grown in 1992 at their tobacco farm outside Santiago called Chateau de la Fuente. After aging for 3 years, the first all-Dominican cigar was released in November 1995. It was called the Fuente Opus X, and it was a sensation. Because of the new magazine, The Cigar Aficionado, an unprecedented boom in cigar popularity had begun. Nowhere was it more evident than in the overwhelming demand for the Fuente Opus X. The Fuente Opus X was so popular with consumers that the demand quickly surpassed the supply of cigars. To this day, the production of the Fuente Opus X is limited to only 750,000 cigars per year.
Expectations for this cigar are through the roof. So when someone gets a Fuente Opus X cigar and smokes it, I mean, you know, the reputation of the family is on the line, per se. So, could we make more? We could probably make more. Could we make them as good as we make them now? No. We could make more, but they wouldn't be as good. Could we age them less? Yeah, but they wouldn't be as good. So, we're not about making more and the bottom line, to be honest with you. We're more about just making the absolute best cigar that we can make. And this is one of the greatest cigars in the world.
Every element in this label, every element of Fuente Opus X was created in my heart and in my memory. There is, from the colors, every single element is symbolic. The X, which was Project X, started with the X. Why red? Because to me, red is my color. It has always been my color. To me, when I see red, I see fire. To me, when I see red, I see love. And the FF, Fuente. With all the love of my grandfather, Arturo Fuente, is my father's time. And this is the way I wanted to pay tribute, to really honor my father and show my respect, and to show my father how much I love him, are the two F's. The O, which is in the background. When I tasted tobacco the first time, when I tasted the second time, after the tobacco started maturing, after tobacco was fermented, after tobacco was aged 1 year, 2 years, and 3 years, and we're ready to introduce it to the market, I know it's Project X. Fuente, Project X. I can't introduce my child as Project X. So I thought to myself, what does this tobacco remind me of? What does it taste like? What is it? And I remember the word that I see over and over in these countries and soap operas, and it's part of the life and it's something. The word opulente, opulent. And I thought to myself, Fuente, opulente, X, of course. Who's going to pronounce it? Right under the word opulente was the word opus. And I look at the word and it was described as your work of a lifetime, your brainchild. And I thought, Fuente, opus sex, opus sex, opus sex, opus sex, opus sex. It sounded like sex. I said, shit, there's what's greater in life than sex.
In 1998, nature dealt them another blow. Its name was Hurricane George. It was a Category 3 hurricane, and it hit the Dominican Republic with winds of up to 130 miles an hour. The damage to Chateau de la Fuente was devastating.
I remember the day that the storm, we couldn't get in touch here, the phones or nothing. So my son and I came down at 6 o'clock in the morning, and we had to abandon the car in the highway because we couldn't cross to the farm. So we walked down, all the trees were down, everything down. And when I first came into this farm and I saw oil barns, I think we had about 19 barns, tobacco barns, and there was 17 down on the floor, if I recall. So I remember I told my son, I guess this is a word from God. This is it. I mean, we've gone through so much already. And I told my son that, and my son looked at me and said, Dad, what you gone through, you mean to tell me you were ready to quit now? You must be getting old. I said, Carlito, what do you think? He said, we'll make it better. So I said, okay, we'll make it better. It was tough. I think for the first time in my life that after everything that I've gone, I thought this was just a message. This is it. But I guess my son being with me so long that he figured that with everything that I've gone through in the past, that this will not stop him, and it didn't.
Carlos Fuente came as close as he's ever been to giving up. But he and Carlito ultimately refused to surrender, and they rebuilt Chateau de la Fuente into something even grander than it had once been. Today, it is one of the most beautiful tobacco farms in the world. Over the past 10 decades, the Fuente family has had to overcome obstacle after obstacle. What they did is nothing short of astonishing. On the surface, none of it should have worked, and for an ordinary family, it wouldn't have. But the Fuente family is no ordinary family.
I think more that it was determination. We slept, ate, dreamed, played, worked, nothing but tobacco. And I mean, we had a lot of bad times, and but we just overcome it. We overcome it. We just look further out and keep on trying.
The Fuente family has been in the cigar business almost a century. 3 generations of passionate cigar makers. Throughout it all, their constant beacon of purpose and strength has been the family. The dream of a humble immigrant from Cuba at the turn of the century had come true. 100 years later, the Fuente family joins the ranks of the other great families in the world whose name stands for the very best the world has to offer.